The laughter was loud enough to drown out the music. Three men, faces red with alcohol and arrogance, had Vanessa pressed against the terrace railing, their hands bold, their words filthier than the air around them. One of them groped her as the others jeered the city skyline flickering behind them. Phones came out. Nobody stepped in. The humiliation burned hotter than the whiskey in her veins. Vanessa Moore was 32, a Golden Globe-nominated actress who had clawed her way from the grit of Chicago's South Side to the silver screens of Los Angeles. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, the wrap party for her latest action film. Instead, the spotlight she worked her whole life to earn was now a cruel weapon casting her as a victim in a scene she never auditioned for. It started hours earlier when the crew's mood shifted from festive to rowdy. She'd seen it before, the way some men given enough drinks and an audience became predators. She avoided their corner, kept her circle small, smiled politely when they passed. But fame was a magnet, and arrogance often felt entitled to pull. One of them. Ryan, mid-30s, cocky stunt coordinator, had been nursing a grudge ever since Vanessa insisted on doing her own fight scenes instead of letting his team make her look tougher. The others, Luke and Derek, were hanger-ons with inflated egos and nothing to lose. They found her alone, looking over the city from the balcony, and decided the moment belonged to them. Ryan leaned in first, whiskey breath hot against her cheek. "Bet you don't kick as hard off camera," he whispered, his hand sliding down her back. She stiffened, stepping sideways, but Luke moved in, boxing her in. Fingers grabbed at her hip. Another hand brushed her chest. Her heart pounded not with fear, but with the raw heat of fury. She looked over their shoulders at the crowd inside, dozens of faces, pretending not to see the music, conveniently swallowing the moment. It wasn't the first time Vanessa had been cornered in her career, but it was the first time she felt no obligation to play nice for the sake of reputation. Something deep buried since her teenage years in Chicago shifted awake. "Let go," she said, voice flat. They laughed. Ryan squeezed her harder. "Come on, we're just having fun," he said, his words coated in mockery. She didn't scream. She didn't push. She memorized every smirk, every word. Her hands stayed at her sides, knuckles tightening like coiled springs. Because tonight, she decided, wouldn't end here. Tonight, they'd learn the kind of woman they thought they could humiliate. By the time the party wound down, Vanessa had left quietly, without a scene, without tears. But she wasn't going home. She was already planning. The years she'd spent training in dusty gyms, drilling combinations, learning to dismantle a threat in seconds, those years weren't for stunt choreography alone. And if these men thought the camera loved a scandal, they were about to star in the kind of footage they'd never lived down. Vanessa didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, in her downtown loft, staring at the city lights, her mind replaying the balcony scene frame by frame. The sting wasn't just from the groping. It was from the laughter, the way they dismissed her as harmless. In their eyes, she was a pretty face, with lines written for her, not a woman who could break a man down to his knees in under 10 seconds. Her phone buzzed around 2 a.m., a text from her friend and stunt double Kara. "I saw what happened. You okay?" Vanessa stared at the words, thumb hovering, before typing back, "I'm fine." But the truth was, she was anything but fine. In moments like these, she always thought back to her father. He'd raised her in a cramped apartment on Chicago's South Side after her mother left. He wasn't gentle, but he was honest, drilling one lesson into her from the time she could walk: nobody will save you. You have to save yourself. When the neighborhood boys tried to corner her on the walk home from school at 14, it wasn't the cops or teachers who stopped them. It was the Krav Maga instructor. Her father enrolled her with a wiry ex-Marine who taught her how to turn fear into offense. Acting had been her escape, but the discipline of those years never left her. On screen, she'd been trained to look deadly. Off screen, she actually was. Yet for more than a decade in Hollywood, she'd held back knowing that one wrong move could destroy her career. She played the game smile on set laugh, at the jokes ignore the harmless touches. But after last night, the rules had changed. By sunrise, she was already sketching out her plan. She knew the men's routines. They'd be back on set in 2 days for final pickups. Between costume changes and lighting setups, there were stretches of downtime, backstage narrow corridors, concrete floors, and just enough privacy for someone to make a mistake. She called Kara. "You still got that GoPro?" "Sure, why?" "I'm gonna need you to be in the right place at the right time. No questions. Just trust me." Kara hesitated. "Vanessa, what are you planning?" "Something educational." The next day, Vanessa was all professionalism on set. She laughed when Ryan passed by, even waved at Luke and Derek in the makeup trailer. She could feel them relaxing, convinced the incident had been swept under the rug. That was exactly what she wanted. She also knew they thrived on pushing boundaries, especially when no one else was watching. It wouldn't take much to bait them, just a little proximity, a little fake vulnerability. And when they took the bait, she'd give them something they'd never forget. Late that afternoon, Vanessa positioned herself near the soundstage's rear exit, pretending to be lost in her phone. As she expected, Ryan was the first to spot her elbowing Luke and Derek with a grin. They drifted over casual but predatory, blocking her in just like they had on the balcony. "What, no date tonight?" Ryan smirked. She looked up slowly, masking her pulse with a bored expression. "Actually, I was hoping you three could help me with something." Their eyes lit up. The trap was set. Ryan raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Help you with what?" His tone dripped with smug amusement, as if he'd just been handed another opportunity to play his little game. Vanessa tucked her phone into her back pocket and stepped just close enough for them to think they were in control. "I need to rehearse a scene," she said, her voice calm, almost sweet. "It's for the director's cut. More physical, more intense." Luke chuckled. "Physical, I like the sound of that." Derek smirked, glancing at Ryan as if to say, "She's coming around." "Yeah," Vanessa continued. "But I need privacy. Don't want the whole crew watching." She glanced toward the dimly lit backstage corridor, a space used for storing props and gear. The overhead light flickered, casting long shadows on the concrete floor. "We can go there." The men didn't hesitate. Ryan led the way, his swagger loud, even in silence, while Luke and Derek flanked Vanessa. She felt the air shift as they entered the narrow space, the faint hum of machinery, the smell of sawdust and paint, the thick sense of isolation. Kara was already in position, hidden just behind a stack of set flats, the GoPro strapped to her chest. Vanessa gave the smallest nod as she passed. The camera was rolling. They stopped midway down the corridor, away from prying eyes. Ryan leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "All right, superstar, what's the scene?" Vanessa took a slow breath, centering herself the way she'd done 1,000 times before fight choreography. But this time, it wasn't choreography. "It's simple," she said, her eyes locked on Ryan. "You try to grab me, I react." Luke grinned. "That's it. Easiest job I've had all week." Ryan stepped forward, reaching for her arm, too casual, too confident. That was his mistake. Vanessa moved faster than he could process. Her left foot pivoted, her right leg shot up, and the ball of her foot slammed into his solar plexus with enough force to echo off the walls. Ryan folded instantly, a wheeze escaping his lungs as he dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. What the Luke began, but Vanessa was already moving. She spun toward him, delivering a sharp front kick to his thigh that buckled his leg. As he stumbled forward, she hooked her arm around his neck and yanked him into a chokehold, twisting him sideways so that his face was inches from the wall. Derek lunged from behind, trying to grab her waist. Without releasing Luke, Vanessa shot her elbow backward, connecting hard with Derek's ribs. The impact knocked him back a step, his breath exploding in a sharp grunt. She released Luke just long enough to pivot and deliver a roundhouse kick that caught Derek square across the jaw. Both men staggered Ryan, still gasping on the floor, Luke clutching his neck, Derek holding his face. The corridor was silent, except for their groans and the steady hum of the lights. Kara stepped out from behind the flats, camera still recording. "Got it all," she said, her voice low but steady. Vanessa didn't even glance back. She stood over Ryan, her chest rising and falling, her voice cold enough to frost glass. "Next time you think about putting your hands on me," she said, "remember how hard it is to breathe right now." No one moved. No one dared. Ryan tried to speak, but only a ragged wheeze came out. His face was pale, a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead as he struggled to suck in air. Luke leaned against the wall, massaging his neck, glaring at Vanessa like he wanted to lunge again. But fear anchored him in place. Derek spat on the ground, the metallic tang of blood in his mouth, his jaw already swelling. Vanessa's gaze swept over all three, unflinching. The corridor felt colder now, the flickering overhead light throwing jagged shadows across their faces. Kara stayed back, camera steady every second, immortalized in high definition. "Pick up your friend," Vanessa ordered, nodding toward Ryan. Her voice carried the same steel edge her old Krav Maga instructor used when delivering orders. Luke hesitated. "You think this changes anything?" he muttered, trying to salvage some pride. She stepped forward just one step, but it was enough to make him flinch. "Yeah," she said flatly. "It changes everything." They shuffled awkwardly, helping Ryan to his feet. He leaned heavily on Derek, still clutching his chest. Vanessa blocked the corridor exit, forcing them to pass her to leave. As they got close, she leaned in just enough for them to hear her low voice over the hum of the lights. "You're lucky this stayed in-house. Next time I don't hold back." The walk back to the set was silent. The three men moved stiffly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Vanessa followed at a distance, her pulse steady now, her mind already turning to the next step. The footage Kara had was her insurance, but the physical memory she'd burned into them, that was the real deterrent. Back on set, the crew buzzed with whispers. Word traveled fast, even without details. The director gave Vanessa a curious look, but didn't ask questions. Kara quietly slipped the GoPro into her tote, her expression unreadable. Between takes, Vanessa caught sight of Ryan across the soundstage. He was hunched in a chair, wincing every time he shifted. Luke avoided her entirely, and Derek kept his distance, his jaw stiff with pain. For the first time since she'd met them, none of them had a single word to say to her. Later that evening, in the makeup room, Kara closed the door behind them. "You realize," she said, "if this gets out, it'll be everywhere." Vanessa met her friend's eyes in the mirror. "Good. Let people know what happens when you cross the line." Kara smirked faintly. "Guess you're done playing nice." "I was done the second they touched me." She left the set without saying goodbye. Out in the parking lot, the night air was cool against her skin, washing away the heat of the fight. But she knew this wasn't over. Men like Ryan, Luke, and Derek didn't change overnight, but they did remember pain. And she intended for that memory to stay fresh for a long, long time. As she slid into her car, her phone buzzed with a text from Kara. "Footage is backed up and safe. Just say the word." Vanessa typed back only 2 words. Not yet. She wasn't finished with them. The following morning, Vanessa arrived on set earlier than usual. The air still smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee, the quiet before the storm of cameras and crew. She walked with calm, deliberate steps, her heels clicking against the concrete as if each sound were a countdown. Today wasn't about a fight. It was about sealing the lesson. Ryan, Luke, and Derek were huddled together near the craft services table, their conversation hushed. Ryan's posture was stiff, his breathing still shallow. Derek's jaw was taped in place, a faint bruise blooming along his cheekbone. Luke kept glancing toward Vanessa, like a man checking if the wolf was still in the woods. She didn't break her stride as she passed them. "Morning, boys," she said evenly, not even slowing down. The casual tone was sharper than a threat. It told them she wasn't afraid, and more importantly, she wasn't done. During a short break between takes, she spotted them again in the corridor by the dressing rooms. This time, there were no shadows, no isolation, just enough people passing by to make them feel exposed. She approached slowly, phone in hand. "I wanted to share something with you," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes had the same cold glint as the night before. She tapped her screen, and Kara's GoPro footage lit up every groan, every blow. Every second of their humiliation playing back in crisp clarity. Ryan's face went pale. "Delete it," he said barely above a whisper. "Why would I do that?" Vanessa asked, tilting her head. "It's art. Real. Raw. Might even win an award." Luke stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Look, we get it. You made your point. Just nothing," she cut in. "You crossed the line. And this," she lifted the phone slightly, "is my insurance policy. One more word, one more move, and this hits every inbox in this industry. You'll never get work again." The weight of her words sank in. Derek shifted uncomfortably, muttering something under his breath. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. They knew they were beaten, not just physically, but socially, professionally. From that day forward, the atmosphere on set shifted. The men kept their distance, their bravado evaporated. The crew, once blind or indifferent, began watching out for one another in subtle but unmistakable ways. And Vanessa, she didn't need to speak about what happened. The silence that followed her into a room said it all. Weeks later, the movie wrapped. At the premiere, Vanessa walked the red carpet in a black gown that made every flashbulb stutter. Interviews asked about her performance, her stunts, her dedication. No one mentioned Ryan, Luke, or Derek, but she caught them in the crowd, standing far off, avoiding her gaze. After the screening, Kara raised a glass in the after-party. To knowing when to hit back, she said. Vanessa smiled faintly, into making it count, because, in her world, justice wasn't just about defending yourself. It was about making sure the message was heard loud enough to echo long after the fight was over. What happened to Vanessa wasn't just another ugly moment in Hollywood. It was a reminder of how silence feeds predators. Too often, people look away, hoping someone else will step in. But real change comes when someone refuses to play the victim and takes back control. Vanessa didn't just defend herself physically. She made it clear that boundaries are non-negotiable and consequences are inevitable. The lesson is simple. Stand your ground. Whether in a dark alley, a crowded party, or a high-pressure workplace, your dignity is worth protecting. The fight for respect isn't always clean, and it isn't always fair, but it's always necessary.